Welcome to the Ultimate Music Teacher's Productivity and Profitability Podcast. I'm your host, Glory St. Germain. Tune in to discover how you can unleash your teaching potential and turn your passion for music education into profit. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Ultimate Music Teacher's Productivity and Profitability Podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of music education and entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Glory St. Germain, and today we are thrilled to have a special guest, Frank Horvat, an award-winning composer and pianist whose work has been described as emotional and intense by WholeNote Magazine, known for his blend of genres and his ability to tell deeply personal stories through his music. Frank has made a significant contribution to contemporary music in Canada and beyond. His exploration of themes like love and the environment, mental health, and social justice shows audiences to reflect and connect in this fast-paced music world. So let's dive into our conversation with Frank. Welcome, sir.
Glory, such a pleasure to join you on your podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to explore your journey in music, and I know that it's been very unique and inspiring for all of us. So could you share with us what probably initially drew you into the world of music composition and piano?
So I actually, when I was growing up in Ottawa, music was a very ingrained thing for me from a very early age. And interestingly enough, though, my parents are not musicians, or not trained musicians, but they're huge music fans. They were then, they are still now. And, there was just always music in the house, and I was just always intrigued by music. I remember from a very early age, I would sit on the floor in the living room of the apartment where I grew up with my parents. And, I would put cleaning pails on the floor and get cooking spoons from the kitchen and just drum along and put the records on and play along with that. And the thing that really put me over the top was like when I was 5, we visited a family friend who had an organ. And I was just completely intrigued by this organ. The only problem was I was 5 and I couldn't reach the pedals. So the music school that my parents took me to, they took me to this music school and they said, listen, he cannot reach these pedals. Why don't we start him with the accordion? And my parents being of immigrants to Canada from Europe, from Central Europe, well, that was like telling them, why don't we teach them how to walk on the moon? That was like the best news ever for my parents, because they were just absolutely love the accordion. That was part of their culture and so forth. So I started with accordion lessons up to about 10 or 11. I really excelled with the accordion. And then I switched to piano around 10 or 11. And, and around that same time, I started composing. I remember my first composition I ever did was when I was 9 years old. And my teacher liked the composition so much that he said, let's sign you up for the composition class at the Kiwanis Festival in Ottawa. And I'm like, well, sure, okay. I don't know what that's all about, what's going to happen there. But I composed this piece and I show up there in this giant cathedral, and there is an esteemed composer, and all the other kids in the class were like 7, 8, 9 years older than me. Right. And they were like writing, quote, serious music, and I went over there and I composed some little piece that I named after one of the characters in an Archie comic book. So, you know what? From that point on, I always knew that something creative related to my music was going to be a big thing. I practiced and I focused and I did my exams and learned all the traditional repertoire, but there was always something intriguing about improvising. I practiced when I was a teenager to go through all my RCM piano grades and so forth. But, I would spend so much time improvising and into high school and playing in bands. And it's like, that was such an integral part of my music education to who I am today. Not just all that formal study that I did, but all just the idea of just experimenting and trying things out, from that early age. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have all that.
And I think too, it's so interesting, Frank, because so many times as music educators, you don't even sometimes realize the impact that you're having on that young child who is going to become a composer like you. And I think when we look back and say, wow, like if it wasn't for that sort of initial little drum kit, I hope you mopped up the floor after you had pails all over the place. But I think once you got started and just realized how much fun it was. And I know when you talk about your music, you're really known for addressing a wide range of themes now. I mean, all the way from love to social justice. How do you choose themes for your compositions, and what maybe inspires you to blend all of these elements into your music?
I think it's just everyday things. It's like, probably for you or anybody listening, it's just this idea of, well, what touches your heart on a given day? And one of the topics I tend to keep coming back to a lot is environmental themes and our relationship with nature. Just think to things that touch my heart and things that maybe we take for granted. I think about that a lot. I was thinking about that lately today. Like I do cover a lot of range of themes and topics in my music. And that wide range, I often think about what ties them together. And I think the thing that ties them together a lot is the fact that I'm curious and I want to learn about how to explore more of that, like learn more about these ideas and how can I use my musical voice to do that, and maybe perhaps bring other people along my collaborators who might do that. And also things that go under the radar related to that, things that are maybe a lot of people aren't talking about or focused on. And just as a way to, bring awareness. I often talk about, as human beings on this planet, I really feel a strong sense that we all should have a mission in some form or another.
Yes.
And this mission is really, really important. And so for some people, it could be, what you do. You're expanding music education and giving progressive new ways for people to enrich the lives of music students. That's an incredible mission. For other people, it might be to make speeches or to be activists or to organize, to be in the background. And I may have some skills in all of that in what I do, but first and foremost, I guess, just feels natural to me, to my contribution in the world is to compose music. So I sort of often feel a sense of obligation, and I enjoy this obligation that the music I write should reflect the world I live in and hopefully bring awareness and bring new ideas, perhaps start conversations, engage people, to take that next step further. So I hold that really close to my heart, that idea, because that's, I guess, my calling to do that.
Before we hit the record button, we were talking a little bit about the power of music and how it can move us so deeply. Even listening to, my husband singing or something, it transports our hearts. And I know even during, the darkest days of COVID, I remember teaching online, and one of my students said to me, Miss Glory, if it wasn't for music, I don't think I could survive, because I have nothing. I have like no friends, nowhere to go, can't leave my room. I eat in here, I sleep in here, I do my homework in here, like I do my music in here. I moved my piano in here. Like it's really, and it kind of ties into where we're going into the concept of music for self-isolation, because I find that concept so intriguing, and especially given its acclaim. Can you tell us more about this project and its impact on listeners? Because it has been a challenging time.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the really great experiences in my life, to work on the Music for Self-Isolation project. And, it's sort of ironic that, one of my quote unquote, most, prideful moments was taking place at a time when, the world was suffering so much at the same time. And, basically the idea there was born out of, I think it was the third Sunday of March. And in 2021, and everything was just closing down. I was having things that were scheduled either postponed or canceled outright. As a composer, that didn't impact me as much. I was still teaching. And compared to my friends and colleagues who were performers, and they made their living performing, and just how overnight their way of living just completely disappeared. And I remember I was walking to my teaching studio along a creek where I live here in Toronto. And the whole idea just popped in my head. I said, what if I have nothing to do. All my plans have changed. So what am I going to do now with all the time I have? And I thought, you know what? If everything's going to shut down and that type of thing, the least I can do is just compose one little piece of music for one instrument, one different instrument every day for 30 days and see what happens. So I remember the first piece I composed was, I went on social media and I told everybody what I'm going to do. And I asked people to give me a list of instruments. So that was absolutely fascinating. And I got a list, and the first instrument I composed for was flute. And so I did the flute piece. And what I would basically do in that time period, in that spring of 2021, is I would compose the piece that day. And then I would quickly make the sheet music, put it on my website, do the social media post that it's there. And I would just repeat that every single day, just have that sort of sense of routine. And basically I said, hey, anybody who plays that instrument, here's the music for free. You can do whatever you want. You want to post a video online of yourself playing this. This is music for you to enjoy, to play during this time period when you might not have a lot to do, and maybe something that might bring you some solace or peace or tranquility at this time to sort of stay active. Well, before I know it, the thing just expanded and people got really excited about it. In the end, there was hundreds of performances of these short little pieces for various instruments over that time span, all through the pandemic. We ended up making an album, which we recorded in an empty Roy Thompson Hall here in Toronto, which was absolutely an amazing experience. We ended up having conversations with people. And I think what I ended up doing, I just started the whole thing just trying to stay busy. But what ended up happening is we sort of created a sense of community. A bunch of people, a lot of people, some people I knew, some people I didn't previously know from all around the world. And it was something that we were all going through together. And just to be able to, do that from just like a creative idea, like a creative project, just to keep myself personally busy was such a blessing in my life. Honestly, I think it's the way I kept my own mental well-being during the pandemic. So.
Yeah. How much fun is that though? And sometimes, you're making me smile. I know we're on audio only, but you're making me smile, Frank, because I'm thinking when you post something and say, this is what I'm going to do, and you now have accountability with the world because you said 30 days and you've committed to it, but then the momentum starts going and it's so much fun to see the engagement and other people going, yeah. And, can you write something for this instrument? And what about the banjo? And, all these other ideas. So how much fun is that? And
it was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, Gloria, but I'm just going to say the other reason why it was so amazing was because of the spontaneity of it all. Mm-hmm. That was the key thing. My life as a composer, I love my life, but often any project I work on is meticulously planned. It often has like a lifespan of like 5 years. I mean, like sometimes we're planning projects for 2 years before I'll even start composing a note. That tends to be my world of how I compose music. This was fantastic because it was just like literally I decided on a Sunday I'm going to do this. And by Tuesday, that 2 days later, I started the 30 days, So it's wonderful that we can have spontaneity in our life,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, be careful what you say out loud because you got to commit. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it brought a lot of joy to so many people that were cheering you on and were not only enjoying the music, but we're thinking, hey, what can I do? Right. Because then one thing kind of spirals into another and it gets exciting. And I know that you've also been recognized for not shying away from mixing politics with your art. How do you navigate that balance between artistic expression and the political commentary in your compositions?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's something that in my creative life and also my personal life has evolved. If you would have asked me that question, say 10 years ago, I would have probably said, my answer probably would have been, as a creative entity, I have a voice and I have to use this voice to really ensure that, ideals that are close to my heart that can make the world a better place, that can be impacted and, make an impact. And, think a lot of my compositions in maybe perhaps my younger days were sort of a little bit edgy and reflected that. But you know what I've really, as I'm getting older, I'm quickly realizing that even though I have a passion I'm very strong in my own personal ideals, I'm also realizing as I get older and hopefully wiser that the world isn't black and white. You know, it's like nothing is, and unfortunately we do live in a world like that right now, where we're being divided and we're being told this is how you should think, or this is always wrong, and this is always right. Well, I tend to think that almost everything in our world isn't so much like that. So what I'd like to hope that a lot of my compositions are doing these days, the newer compositions that I'm composing, is presenting ideas in a way that allow the listener to come up with their own ideas, perhaps to present multiple ideas that are abstract enough to allow, as I mentioned earlier, for a conversation to start up. And even though I still have really strong ideals and feelings about the environment and how, I really hope that we can, become a more balanced with nature, that we can become a more just society, that human rights are respected. I feel like I want to do that in a way where the music is interesting, but it's ambiguous in a good way of, that it's ambiguous enough that it can allow people to think for themselves, to provoke a conversation. And I think as an artist, I think we have a really important place to play like that and to work with that, because we don't have to be so literal all the time. And often the magic really comes when the listener can have their own personal relationship with the creation.
Yeah. Wow. It's so powerful, Frank. And, it's just really making me reflect. I mean, you're an accomplished composer and pianist, and you've experienced this evolving landscape in the music industry. And how do you see technology and all the digital platforms influencing the future of music composition and education, for that matter?
Well, we do live in a technological age, and basically, everything, if we want to listen to anything now, you and I are old enough to realize there used to be this thing called a record store,
Yes.
We used to go to if I heard a song on the radio, I couldn't just, open a computer. What was a computer? I didn't have a computer. I would have to go down to the record store. It would be carefully cultivated. Now we have access to an infinite amount of music, everything in a snap of a finger. And, this is a big conversation in my world amongst colleagues, is that has the technology devalued the music? And I don't know. I mean, I've heard great arguments for pros and cons, and there's some stalwarts out there that are really holding out. I think that technology is like anything. There's advantages and disadvantages. And the advantage is the fact that you and I can have this conversation right now, and that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
You've created your own platform to share ideas and bring new ideas and create an audience. And this is wonderful. In the good old days when media was just controlled from this kind of thing, it was very difficult to get the voice out. So there's sort of been I find that there's been an important democratization of our world and our planet because of that. From a creative standpoint, though, I think that the public often expects things instantaneously. And because the way the music business is set up with all of the streaming sites, which of course I have all my music on there, I feel like I have to, if I want people to listen, I have to have it readily available. I can't work a way around that. But, there is a part of me that says, is this good or not? And what's fascinating about this is that even the people, I'll give an example like Spotify, this company like that, apparently they're losing billions. They're hardly making money. I've seen documentaries and news reports, as successful and as an example as being the biggest thing. So if nobody is making money,
Yeah, right.
if the artist isn't making money, the people supporting the artist, they're struggling. The people that are supplying the music to the public, there's somebody far smarter than me is going to have to come along and maybe propose a new model. There has to be maybe this rebirth of how we think this to make it a little bit more of a sustainable ecosystem for everybody involved,
Well, I think it's always sad when I have to admit that, I was born BC before computers. I saw the invention of not quite, but the gramophone. I still have 78 records, and then it went to LPs and then 45s and then before cassette to 8 tracks. And then 8 tracks turned into cassette tapes, and cassette tapes turned into CDs, and then CDs turned into USB sticks. And when I look, I still have all of the above. And I think what I miss the most, though, Frank, is just they're coming back to LPs, but it was always great to kind of have that album cover. You felt like you had it in your hands, and just the whole act of listening to music. And now it's so different, right? And I think too, sometimes, you're a performing artist. So now when back in the day, you could go and do a show and you could be selling your CDs or your 8 tracks or whatever it was, your albums. And now they just go to Spotify. And so you're right. You're not, I remember back in the day when my husband would be performing and doing big shows, and I would be the sales rep in the corner selling his CDs and, 2 for 1 and, all this stuff that we would do. But I kind of miss that, don't you?
I do. And I remember I did a big solo piano concert tour back in 2010 and 2011, which is just a little 12-ish, 13 years ago, not that long ago. And I remember the amount of money that we were able to collect from people, that point of purchase sale. You touch people's heart and souls, and then they have something tangible. I really feel sorry. I don't do much performing these days. I'm doing more composing for other music for other people to play these days, but I really feel sorry for, gigging musicians, because, you used to have the merch table there, 100%. And the merch table can really give you a lot of important income. And not only that, but then have something tangible that they can bring home, and then you can continue to, to interact with your fan, because they had access to that. After that, we started to experiment with download cards. So there was the download card phase that you would go home on your computer and type in a little code because you bought this download card, almost like long distance cards or whatever. And, but that died quickly too, because nobody downloads anything, they're just streaming from the big sites like Spotify or Apple Music. And I've been thinking a lot about what music has to be to the public these days, what the public is looking for, especially this. And one can argue that the fact that the technology has made it easy to ingest music, at home in your earbuds while you're out, it makes it so easy. The one thing that they've not been able to replicate through technology is the live experience. So there's something, and the key word for me is experience. I'd like to think that we should stop calling concerts, and we should call them experiences. You are cordially invited to this experience where you will feature this and that type of thing. So that could involve, lighting and mood and ambiance, or food to go along with it, or some unique special venue where traditional music would not be held. I think that we, as artists, as musicians, this is a great challenge for us. It allows us to explore our creativity and see how we can, think from the audience's perspective to give them something so special that no technology can ever, replicate that. So, I'm like everybody. I love going on Spotify and quickly listening to any album, and it's so convenient. It's so fantastic. But at the same time, you just can't beat that live thing. That's why everyone was yammering to get back to go to a live show after the pandemic, right? People got tired of watching people do the concert on, Facebook or whatever.
I love that idea. What you just said, you're making the wheels turn in my head, because, I'm I'll be out at MTNA conference and doing a showcase there. And I'm going off to the NAMM show and connecting with some people at the NAMM show. And I'm just thinking, I love the idea of saying, let's make it an experience. That's brilliant. I'm actually going to write that down, because rather than just thinking, oh, just go to a show, go to a concert, but it is an experience. And it's even the people beside you, like it's everything around you. You're not just staring straight ahead, you're just absorbing, the atmosphere. And I think it kind of brings us into our next topic, which is about you being a panelist discussing artivism. I hope I pronounced that word correctly,
Yeah.
because can you actually explain this concept to our listeners and how it influences your work?
Yeah, I think the concept of artivism is something that I've always been doing for many years through my music, is using my creative voice as a platform to bring awareness about various issues that are close to my heart and that touches my heart, and just using that to take it one step further to create awareness. I heard about the term, and then I'm like, I read about it somewhere. And then when I heard about it, it's like, hey, wait a minute, that's what I do. Yeah. So, and I think that's the key difference between being an artivist and an activist, is that,
Yes.
An activist is somebody who will, picket, go on the street, make speeches, get petitions signed. We need activists in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And those are really important people to bring more awareness to for injustices in this world, so that can provoke change. An artivist is a bit different because it's basically using your art in the same way, but just letting your art do the talking, so to speak. And I think it's a wonderful idea, because I think we live in a world where we have special gifts, us creative people. We definitely have special gifts. And if someone feels comfortable using that gift to help promote change and to inspire change, or like I said earlier, to engage conversation, I think that's a really important gift. And when we go on social media and we all label our titles of what we do and that type of thing. And, I remember when we were updating this and that for myself online, and we were talking about, pianist, composer, educator, artivist. I'm like, artivist? Should we put this? Am I an artist? I guess I am, And I guess that's okay. And I think that's where it's a little bit different than an activist, because an artivist, like I said, you let your work do the talking. And in essence, your work that you create as a creative being has a life of its own. And that's great, because then the world can have their own relationship with it that isn't 100% it has to be me. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's sort of that separate type of thing. And I think this is an area I hope more artists explore and think of themselves and proudly say it. Because I think sometimes we might live in a world where people are afraid to speak up about certain things. They fear maybe people won't like what I do, so I'm trying to be everything to everybody. And I think that's really dangerous. You lose that authenticity as an artist if you like that.
100%. I mean, you are who you are, right?
Yeah.
And so now you, the magical composer, I have a challenge for you here.
Okay.
So if you could compose a piece of music for any historical figure, who would it be, and what would the title of that composition be?
I think it would be Gandhi. And actually, I think it would be probably two people. It would be Gandhi and it would be Martin Luther King Jr. And, the reason why I picked those two people, Lori, because one of the things that's breaking my heart right now in the world we live in is that despite all these amazing advances as a human species on this planet we continue to somehow not be able to figure out how we can live in peace. You know what I mean? We live in a world where we have wars raging left, right, and center. And I'm actually listening to a very fascinating audiobook right now about Islam and about the teachings of a particular Islamic scholar who lives in the UK. And to really learn about different religions and how the true essence of every religion, what they promote, the good that so many religions promote, and how other people come along and twist this and do this. It just
Yeah.
absolutely breaks my heart. So a lot of my compositions lately have been about themes of becoming immersive, thinking about making yourself stronger so you can be a positive influence on the world.
Yes.
And I think
Yeah.
we need to keep looking. I did a set of pieces about that was inspired by a book co-written by the Dalai Lama. It was a very big thing in my life to compose these electronic pieces. And I did that a few years ago. And I'm really proud of that. So yes, so the title of the piece would be The Peace Within equals Peace for the World. For sure.
Oh.
That would be the working title, because I think a lot of people are struggling right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are struggling with their own mental health.
Yeah.
And they're struggling with the challenges of life. And when you are prone to that, and you are subjected to that, you are definitely not in a positive, open-hearted way to look at the world. You have so many limiting beliefs that limit you and not allow you to think about, okay, how can I be a positive influence in this world? How can I think of how to be more tolerant to people around me that maybe don't look like me or dress like me or even think like me, you know what I mean? But what do we have in common,
I love the title of your piece. Sorry, yeah. I'm just going to say, I love the title of the piece, and I actually really challenge you to compose that, because the peace within reflects, the peace with the world. It's just so resonating with me that I think that would be a masterpiece, Frank.
Well, hopefully I'll write it one day. And, the right situation will come along for me to write it. And because I think this is important. And I've been thinking about this a lot. This relates to one of the questions you asked earlier, like how is my voice about being an artivist or that kind of thing changed? But it really, I've been thinking a lot about, in my own musical practice, about spirituality and personal health and well-being. And I really firmly believe in that. Like, how can you deal with the big existential, issues that plague our world if you yourself are not in peace, right? How can we expect that? You know what I mean? So I hope that we sort of think about that more, that rather than always thinking about problems and statistical things, it's well terrible.
Said. Yeah. So who's been your greatest mentor in your musical journey? What was the most valuable lesson you've learned from them?
There's a really well-known Canadian composer who I love dearly, but I'm not going to say his name. And I hope this doesn't sound pithy, but he told me he says, I always compose that always get paid. Oh. So I'm only sharing that because you are very entrepreneurial, and I love following you and knowing you. And I learned so much about how, you as artists, and being in a creative industry, how sometimes it's easy to sort of think of ourselves as, well, we have this higher calling, so money shouldn't get in the way. So I either shouldn't charge or I shouldn't charge at all. And I remember when I got together with my friend, this composer, and he said that we were having lunch, and he said that, and I was less like, wow, that's pretty good. And it stuck with me lately. I don't know, because I'm thinking I love what I do. Yeah. But if I often talk now to younger composers, and a lot of younger composers these days, and they're asking me, they're starting off and they're like, how can I be creative when I have to pay bills and stuff like that? Well, it's like, well, you have to find that balance. You have to diversify. And sure, maybe when you're starting off, I know when I started off as a composer, I would compose music for people for free and that type of thing. But as you establish yourself more, I think that's important. I remember I was at, I think you might even have been there too. We had a great panel discussion amongst music teachers at a music teachers convention here in Toronto a number of years ago. And we had a panel discussion about how much should you charge? Yeah. And it was a fantastic thing. And I remember one of our panelists said very carefully, what you do has value. Yes. And absolutely has value. And just because you're an artist or you think, oh, well, there's so many people who do what I do, you cannot undervalue yourself. So there's been so many great artistic nuggets and things like that. But when you ask the question, I thought I would like to share that because I
Yeah.
sort of joke about it, like how blatant my mentor told me that. But, looking back on it now, that bluntness was
Yeah.
very accurate.
Absolutely. I mean, the podcast is called Ultimate Music Teachers Productivity and Profitability Podcast for a reason, because you're so right, Frank. Like, you still have to buy groceries and you still have to put your music together, and your time is valuable. And finally, for our aspiring composers and musicians who are listening today, can you share a little piece of advice that guided you throughout your career other than get paid for what you're worth?
Even the deeper thing that now it will inspire that, we're sort of talking about it out of order here, but the first thing is you must love what you do. That is for me the absolute number one thing. And for me, actually, it even goes deeper than, I really like what I do. I really love my piano teaching studio. I love, performing with this orchestra or doing these concerts. I love composing music for so-and-so. That's easy for people to say. For me, what I've learned in perhaps the last 5-10 years, as I'm finally getting close to 50 now, I'm starting to finally figure this out. It's been like a journey of almost 30 years working as a professional musician. What I'm finally realizing is I can't live without doing this.
Yeah.
I can't do anything else. And I know that because every time I say, okay, it's getting a little intense, I'm just going to pretend like I'm quitting or I'm going to do this. I actually say I'm quitting every single day to this day. I'm like, this is too hard. This is driving me crazy. I feel like quitting. And you know what? Within 5 seconds after saying that, I'm just filled with this overwhelming sense of joy, this overwhelming sense of purpose, and this overwhelming sense that I can't do anything but this. And if you, as anybody listening, who can get to that point in whatever they might do in this creative life or any field you do for that matter, if you can get to that point, that's the ultimate nirvana right there. That's why I feel so blessed. It's a blessing to be invited to speak on your podcast today. As much as I'm enjoying this and stuff, I actually don't need this. You love it so much, and it's such a high purpose inside you. Could you do this if nobody was to ever listen to your music, ever want to talk to you about it, write an article about you, give you a compliment? Would you still be able to do it with the same sense of purpose and joy?
Yeah.
And that I finally learned. And what's ironic about all that is that after I finally figured that out and came to that level of awakening, ironically, the world became more interested in what I was doing.
Yeah.
So is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm being my true, authentic self,
100%.
So,
yeah. Well, Frank, it's been incredible sharing your insights and your experiences with my listeners, and your dedication to creating music that not only entertains, but it also prompts a reflection and conversation. It's truly remarkable, and you are bringing a joy into the world. And I'm so grateful that you've shared your time with me and all of our listeners as well. And speaking of listeners, how can they learn more about you and your music and connect with you?
Well, thanks for having me, Gloria. Yeah, best way to check out anything I'm working on or doing, or that's part of my life present, is, of course, my website. So people can just visit www.frankhorvat.com.
Okay, perfect. And I'll be sharing that in the show notes as well. And that brings us to an end of another intriguing episode of the Ultimate Music Teachers Productivity and Profitability Podcast. Thank you so much again, Frank, for joining me. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Glory, for having me. It's been a true pleasure.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope this conversation has inspired you to think deeply about the power of music and the role that it plays in our world. So keep tuning in for more inspiring stories and insights from the world of music education and entrepreneurship. Don't forget to subscribe to our Ultimate Music Teachers podcast. If you loved today's episode, please leave us a review and share it with your fellow music enthusiasts. Until next time, keep the music playing and let your musical minds make a difference in the world. Thanks for listening. Have a musical day and teach with passion. Bye now. Thanks for listening to the Ultimate Music Teachers Productivity and Profitability Podcast. Together, we can transform lives through the power of music education. I invite you to explore what's possible for your musical journey inside our UMT community. Simply join our Ultimate Music Teachers private Facebook group, where we network, answer questions, host live events, and connect on a deeper level. Here's to your ultimate music teaching success with productivity and profitability. Till next time, teach with passion.